as a species, should be mature enough to realize that we are actually facing cascading systems collapse on multiple fronts in the next few decades.
Welcome to Green Planet, Blue Planet podcast. I'm here today with Daniel Christian Wahl. Welcome, Daniel.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Daniel is, you're well known for your book, Designing Regenerative Cultures, and you've been in this space of regeneration as an educator, as a consultant in regenerative development for many years now, probably before most, if not you, if you didn't coin the term yourself, So it's such a pleasure and such an honor to be on the podcast with you today and kind of muse into those topics a little bit. I'd love to know from you personally first, though. When was that aha moment in your life? Like, what happened that you were just starting to see the proverbial red thread connect and realize, no, this is the way of nature, and this is the way humans are meant to connect with nature and not just talk and use things as tools, but walk this walk of implementing and participating, almost like co-creating with the natural world.
Well, I guess it's a series of deepening into something that we all know intuitively. So I think I have a 5.5-year-old daughter, and I think she doesn't see the world through the mental scaffolding that we have culturally absorbed, which make a lot of us think that nature and culture are separate things, that somehow humanity and technology are outside of nature. And this perspective that cuts life, which is first and foremost a planetary process, into individuals and species, and then the narrative that these species compete for scarce resources, all of that is a learned way of seeing the world. And I think most people are born into a much more participatory, embodied, sensing, feeling, intuiting the world, and then through language and thinking, we train ourselves to make sense of that world in a given way. And I always felt a really deep connection with the ocean and the Mediterranean. I think my grandmother lived in Italy in the summers, and I spent a lot of time with her there. And that just created an intimacy with that particular bioregion that made me want to study biology, made me want to understand life. So I became a marine mammal biologist for a while, and then got disheartened by reductionist science and the way that everything had to be expressed in p-values and statistics to have any scientific validity. So I ended up being a scuba diving instructor for a while. But when I went back into academia, I did a master's in holistic science at Schumacher College, and that is 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago now. And you mentioned just in your opening something that is this notion of, if we see the world from a holistic perspective and our participatory role in it, then that's like I learned that at Schumacher College, that complexity science now pushes us to understand that this nested complexity that we're not only participants in, but also expressions of, is fundamentally interconnected. And it is uncontrollable and unpredictable, no matter how much AI and big data and all of that we throw at it. So instead of what the Western attempt has always been to predict and control nature, and really what we need to relearn, and what is so deeply aligned with our species lineage, is how do we participate appropriately in this nested complexity in such a way that we understand that serving our communities, serving the community of life, creating conditions conducive to life, is ultimately actually serving ourselves, because we're not really separate from the context that we're embedded in. And that, I think, the learning 20 years ago, the scientific understanding that science has actually found a way of framing this, and in doing so has returned to an insight that indigenous cultures had all along, and that many ancient wisdoms traditions had all along. That's really two things that deeply influenced me and put me on this path.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's beautiful to hear you speak about it, and I think many people can find resonance and find themselves in, similar kind of pathways. Maybe, this falling in love for a bioregion, and having maybe, and I think even our emotional connection to nature is a big part of how we can detect that we're one with nature in a certain way, right? I'm really curious here to unpack one specific thing you just said, Daniel, which is, how do we then participate in this complexity of nature? What do you think is most required in this time right now? It's 2023. You just mentioned AI briefly, and we know that there's like an evolutionary effect of AI probably coming to all of us, right? Like it's going to change the way we operate. But how do we actually recognize ourselves as participants of this larger natural unfolding in this specific time? Like what's required from people that are tuned in?
Well, for me, it's really a question of whether we're not at a critical bifurcation point at which we're asked to make ethical, moral choices about who we are and who we want to be, including holding possible that the narrative that exponential technologies are unstoppable and that AI is out of the box and blah, 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 is a narrative that is a self-fulfilling prophecy. And for me, the whole belief that we need to outsource even more thinking-based intelligence into artificial intelligence is not getting that for 290,000 years of our species' journey as Homo sapiens, we were a lot less focused on the thinking mind and a lot more using what C.G. Jung called the other three ways of knowing that we're capable of, which is sensing, feeling, and intuiting. That's how we knew how to be custodians in a bioregion that brought us forth. That's how we attuned to ourselves as expressions of a living place. And I think we need to really consider that AI is here to stay, but we have the capability of ruling it in and using it in a much, much wiser way. And right now we're not doing that at all. And the hype is dangerous because, I mean, I just recently listened to two guys who have some kind of center for the ethical use of technology in LA, who work in the industry, and they mentioned this stunning statistic that some bona fide research came up with, that over 50% of AI experts believe that there's 10% or greater chance that we go extinct because of what AI causes. And I think that's concerning. But to come back to your question, rather than to spend so much time on AI, is for me it's this falling in love with a place that you mentioned, that reconnecting with our innate biophilic nature, that we're attracted to living things, and that relates to a process that I think we're now all called to do, that Peter Berg from the Planet Drum Foundation, I think, coined, and it's called re-inhabitation. The process of re-inhabiting our communities, our places, our bioregions, and even re-inhabiting the earth herself as living expressions of earth. That's a fundamental shift in our not just societal social contract, but because the social contract of Rousseau came out of the Enlightenment and the separation from nature and the need to create rules for humanity that had been sort of supposedly untied from nature. And what we actually really need right now, I think, is to deeply learn how we can meet our needs in a regenerative way, live a more meaningful and fulfilling life while we heal places, while we heal ecosystems, while we heal our communities, while we work more together, while we undo the obscene levels of inequality that we have within nations and between nations. And that includes you and my privilege too, because we're part of the privileged ones. And that also, like, to my mind, is at the heart of why regeneration is different from doing sustainable solutioneering, because you don't do like regenerative practice unless you do it in a specific place, in a specific context, with specific people and culture. It only is possible to work regeneratively in the nitty-gritty of a real living place, and not some kind of abstract blueprint, master plan, strategy for creating regenerative this, that, or the other. That's not how regeneration works.
Yeah, it's beautiful how you just, kind of guided us through different layers of this conversation, and different layers are important at different times. I think what I've been hearing is we're coming back to this notion of falling in love with or maybe even the biophilic kind of connection to all of nature that we all experience, right? Like being in love with biology in that sense. And it has to do with a place-based, right? Because if it's just an abstraction of the mind, it's all focused on thinking, it's all focused on this, yeah, as you said, solutioneering. Sustainability has this weird energy to it that so many of us were hoping it's going to change the world, and then it just turned into this greenwashing fad of a overcapitalized market. And it's interesting where you just took it there, because we kind of started it at AI, and I want to loop back to that, because I think there is something about what you said right at the beginning of this last question I asked you. AI has the potential, I personally believe, to become a very, very big mirror to us, to show us exactly who we are as the human species. As you said, we're sensing and feeling, we're intuiting, we're place-based and connected. We're connected to each other in the natural world, and all of the thinking and data and capacity of thinking will still not be able to predict all human actions accurately. And so, hopefully, fingers crossed, it's a time where we wake up to who we truly are on an even bigger level, which then allows us to fall in love with the ecosystems, and allows us to connect and create those pathways of solution. I think it's a very incredible time to be alive, Daniel. Would you agree? Would you agree with that? All of this adversity kind of also brings such an like delicious kind of soil, or composting of creating something new.
It depends a little bit into what demographic and situation you're born into on the planet, probably. But from our privileged perspective, I think it is a fascinating time to be alive. I mean, the stakes are out. We don't know whether we're going to make it through the eye of the needle. We've known for more than 50 years that we cannot continue on this path, and we've done very little about it, apart from slightly increasing the rhetoric in the last 20 years. And we're ideally, as a species, should be mature enough to realize that we are actually facing cascading systems collapse on multiple fronts in the next few decades. And in that sense, the thing about sustainability that has been somewhat what bioaccumulation so beautifully calls maybe the way that we respond to the crisis as part of the crisis. And it is this framing that is based on our culturally ingrained and educationally entrained pattern that says we see the world through a set of problems. We find problems, then we define these problems in the abstract. We get scientists to define them even better in the silos of different disciplines. Then we have international conferences where people say, yeah, we have this problem, show up in our country too. And we get more and more abstract with a more and more global problem definition. And then we talk about wicked problems and problem clusters and polycrises and all of that. And then the natural thing is how do we find solutions to them? Well, the point of wicked problems is you can't actually find solutions to them, because They're kind of like whack-a-mole. Like or you cut off the head of the hydra in one situation and it grows back somewhere else. And regeneration in the way that Kara Samford and the Regenesis group are also teaching it, and have done for 30 years, much longer than I've been in this field, tries to say there is another way to work with complexity, and that is through specificity, not through abstraction, not through generalization. Because the problem with this solutioneering mindset is that in the end, we have these wonderful abstract problem definitions, then we have people, engineers and designers and innovators come and try to design solutions for these problems. Then we have the investors come and listen to the pitches of these solutions, and then we try to scale up some of them with lots of money in lots of places because we want to solve the global problem. And then we're surprised that it's not working. Even if all the people involved are well-meaning, good people trying to do their very best and are kind of trying to create a better world. But it's because we're not growing the solutions out of the specificity of a cultural context and the warm data that exists in the relationships between humans, to their history, to a place, to the immigrants that are now part of the community, to the transformations that and how they face the world. And all of that matters. And that's why I think, yes, maybe AI will show us this mirror, but we should definitely watch out that we don't create runaway effects with that technology that we will find difficult to stop. I mean, this is an ancient human story. The first Disney film ever made was The Wizard Apprentice. And The Wizard Apprentice is basically a copy of a story that Goethe expressed as Dr. Faustus, and Marlowe expressed as Faust, and Shelley expressed as Frankenstein, and in the Torah is called the Golem. It says, watch out what magic you wield. And as Arthur C. Clarke put it, every sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. We are dabbling in magic here, and it can run away with us. And that's where I feel like there's such a danger of just letting the discourse of saying, oh, we're now in the age of AI and it's going to change all our lives. Like, okay, let's maybe hit the brakes for a second and even discuss whether it's acceptable that a company like Google can unleash something like ChatGPT without a consent by some form of gremium internationally. And like, don't we all have a say in whether we want this technology in the world?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that we're at this place. You're striking such an interesting kind of chord there. I think you're really representing like a middle path between those extremes in what you just said, Daniel. Because on one hand, like we've been witnessing. You mentioned our privilege, having grown up in Central Europe, both of us. And, so like we've been in this globalized world that has been working for a few, but really has been destroying the natural world and our connection to place and indigenous wisdom and our connection to the regenerative cycles of life. And then at the same time, we have this need almost, let's take AI as the example here again, where the need is, we need to hold companies and maybe even governments accountable on a question of morals and ethics about these advancements that we've been fed, spoon-fed, that they're all progress. Everything technology is progress, but we already know that that's not even remotely true. Most of the technology that's progress also comes with really big side effects, right? Kind of like pharmaceuticals. And so yeah, I think it is absolutely the time to to understand how can power be represented in a different way, so that these gremiums are not just kind of tools and marionettes of governments and big pockets, right? Because that's another big problem of the systems that we've inherited on this planet. I'm in my 30s now, and the way I see it is, growing up on this planet since 1987 was sometimes really frustrating. Like it's a planet where if you don't feel sad every now and then, I don't think you're connected to the ecological truth that we're living as a human species, because it's a bit sad to see that we are a beautiful species on a beautiful planet, but kind of running after some very bizarre metrics and systems. And so the way I see it is we've inherited these systems and they're ours to change. Yet in order to change them, it's almost like the people themselves, that includes you and I and everyone listening, the people themselves need to stand up in sovereignty to say, well, wait a second, don't I have a say in this? Because, like, yeah, I don't need to just take everything like Kool-Aid. And I think we are in those times. We've seen it, with the global pandemic and COVID and restrictions and people, not entirely loving them. We're seeing it with AI now too, where hopefully we're still in front of this really big influx point where it's unstoppable. But then also, I want to come back to what you said. It is a tool, and we are the creators of the tool, right? And so, just like all the systems we've created, they're created by humans. And so, the question that arises for me is, aren't people more powerful than the systems we've inherited? Do you see that as autonomous groups, maybe even decentralized autonomous groups, right? Like the whole notion of DAOs coming together to represent ethics and morals. Do you see that this is probably one of the most kind of like golden nuggets or golden pathways to solve a lot of these issues, is actual people to simply rise up and stand up and speak up about kind of where our stop line is as well, where the no is, where the no thank you is?
Well, the there's so much in what you opened up, and there were lots of
Yeah.
places to go. Well, part of this notion that we were talking about earlier, that like if we understand ourselves, I mean, this is just one framing. There are indigenous ways of wording this that sound less scientific, but equally meaningful in different contexts. But if we are participants in nested complexity that we can't predict and control, and the aim is appropriate participation, this insight of being a participant in nested complexity has a sort of both a humbling, but also a very like audacious making dimension to it. Because on the one hand, like because if you take it to heart, you begin to realize that everything you or I do, everything anybody is doing, everybody who's listening, in every second, what you think, what you say, what you do has agency. And what you don't think and what you don't say and what you don't do also has agency. And it means that we all change the future because we're an expression of the living present, of life expressing itself. And that, on the one hand, makes us very audacious, like I can actually do something. I count. I am unique. I'm here for a reason. I'm one of the diversities of life, and there is no other copy like me or like you or like anybody who's listening. And regeneration, to a large extent, is the question of how do we put that in service to a larger context, the community or the community of life itself, because you can only express that essence, that uniqueness of yourself in service to. It's impossible to express it fully, meaningfully, and healthily in opposition to. And that means that I'm losing my thread here. Yes, we are enormously powerful, but the question is if we do it in some sort of disembodied communities based on DAOs, which is wonderful that we're all connecting on multiple levels of interest, but those create these echo chambers that mean that you're just talking to your like-minded people. And the magic of actual place-sourced, place-based regeneration or bioregional scale regeneration is that within a given bioregion, you will find such diversity that there'll be plenty of people you disagree with. And that's healthy. It's not healthy to some extent. It can be for a while to create these little bubbles where you, with a bunch of friends, create your little eco village or your regen village, and you live in a kind of intentional community. I lived within attentional communities for quite some time and worked with the Global Eco-Village Network for 15, 20 years and with Gaia Education. And I love those community experiments. But they also, in their long journey, realized that it was unhealthy to be just an eco-village with no connection to the surrounding, like the neighboring village or the surrounding bioregion and the watershed. And they've learned that by turning into the skid and meeting all these other people that have different opinions in their region, that's where the real juice of re-inhabitation is. And it also means making ourselves common cause with peasants and farmers and indigenous people who still hold a connection to place that many people still need to relearn. And then there's so much innovation for technology and everything possible when we look at things like a circular economy at the bioregional level. And none of this is black and white, either or, from this to that. It always is a blend of multiple realities. And for example, with regard to the circular economy, rather than having an argument about global cycles of circular or ultra local cycles, is to try to make the cycles of what we use, energy and matter, as small as possible, as regional as possible, and then have a nuanced conversation about what global trade and global collaboration is needed to enable that. We right now, in the way that you were saying earlier about technology, it's like we just, because we're doing it because we can, but we're never asking, should we? And what I've learned, like last year, I did a wonderful conversation with Professor Anne Paulina, an Aborigine elder from Australia, as part of the RSA podcast, Regeneration Rising. And in that conversation, which was the first one in the series, she made me understand that it's not just practice in Australia to honor the original custodians of the land that you're speaking on when you start speaking, but it's also practice to, when Aborigines are on walkabout out on country and they actually don't speak, like she said, we hardly ever speak with each other. It's all about signs. It's all sensing, feeling, and intuiting. We're in communications, but we're not speaking. And then when they sit down somewhere and they start speaking, they ask the place for permission with a kind of phrase that is along the lines of, we are about to use human language for a short time to talk about this, that, and the other. And we believe it serves this community and it serves life. We ask for permission to speak. And then they speak. And then they stop again when they're done. And that is an awareness of how language is already a technology. Like we think, oh, AI and all of this. Language is a technology that, just like AI, traps us into certain ways of dealing with reality. And what we're now hitting the wall of, with AI showing us the mirror, is that we're so much more when we don't just live in language and in concepts and in organizing ideas, but we live in active lived participation with life itself. And that sounds very theoretical, but anybody who's tended a garden and spent time really caring for life will recognize how there is an immediate, like if you care for a little girl or a little boy, like your children, or you care for plants, there's so much communication that gets established very quickly through the caring, through the love, through the attention, through the relational being, that guides you in what you're doing, that isn't based on language. And that's really the hidden capacity that we're blind to because we're so dazzled by science and what we call technology. I think the word is good, the printing press is pretty good too, but we should slow down with a lot of other things.
Yeah, I'm glad for everything you just said and where you just went. I think one thing I want to highlight here is we can, but should we? That's a very important question to ask at this time of our evolution. I would draw the line between AI and the doomsday of AI with, let's say, nuclear energy, right? We
Mm,
can build nuclear bombs, but should we? We can build technology that probably runs away from us and turns around and could destroy us, but should we, right? And so those questions, I think, and I'm even saying I think, but those questions arise beyond the thinking. And you mentioned it earlier, and you mentioned young, right? Like it's sensing, feeling, intuiting, and then it's also thinking. But we've kind of
yeah,
reduced ourselves to thinking beings and made the
exactly.
globalized world, and especially you mentioned privilege a few times in the beginning of this episode, and I remember being a kid and being in a doctor's office and being regarded like a child that knew less. And this is
Mm,
a very marking memory from years like 6 or 7, because I looked at my dad and I looked at the doctor and I'm like, why isn't he talking straight to me? And
mm,
it was out of this hierarchy of being a more mature or more trained thinker, maybe even with Latin words, right? Rather than
mm,
just talking to me as the kid, being like, hey, so this is what I've detected in your body and how do you feel? And so the way I was foregone in that moment, or passed over in this moment, made me realize, oh wow, I don't think I can trust all adults because this guy isn't even regarding me, right? And so I
mm,
think we're doing this with a lot of people on the planet. You mentioned indigenous people or people that grow up with with less means, because of the place-based reality of our global globalized culture. And I think it's quite the opposite. Everyone who's still is more connected to place, or maybe even through poverty connected more to each other, is almost maybe not an advantage. That would be a bit much to say, but there's a richness there that
mm,
most of the over-complexified modernized Western world has completely lost. This connection to more than thinking, this connection to
mm,
more than securing the future, but being here in the now, sensing, feeling, intuiting. um, yeah, and you also mentioned children and nature, right? I think with kids, I don't have kids myself yet, but a lot of my friends do. And I was just here with a 2 year old and a 5.5 year old this week. And you're right, very, like a lot of the dialogue is not spoken.
mm,
There's an exchange that is energetic that maybe some people miss, but it's unmistakably there. And so I
mm,
think it's also part of us as a human species. That's what I meant with AI being that mirror, right? So if it takes over a lot of the complex thinking for us, then we know that some of the thinking isn't maybe even ours to do, right? Maybe in the interbeing of the two of us, yeah, thinking and navigating the dialogue, that's ours to do. We don't need AI for that. But then if I just want to check data, or recall, some kind of measurements from a sensor that's up in the air or a sensor that's in the water, that's not my mental capacity that has to do it. That can be done by a machine, as long as I can then come back to who am I as the human interpreting that data, um, maybe making decisions based on that data, and then coming back to this key question: only because I can, should I? Right? It's
mm.
similar with a knife. I
Yeah,
can break
but
bread or I can hurt someone, but should I?
yeah,
Right? So the moral
but
and ethic ability is really what makes us human.
I mean that's I mean I love. I mean again, indigenous cultures, and maybe I should say this when I use the word indigenous because it's dangerous to open up indigenous as yet another dichotomy that says, okay, this is an indigenous person, this is not an indigenous person. I've had conversations with many indigenous leaders, and it's always a bit iffy when asked that question, but so far everybody has actually been very positive about it. I don't think there are indigenous elders anywhere in any indigenous traditions that would disagree with the sentence that we're all indigenous to life. We're all like, first and foremost, we are life, and then the other identities and stories might or might not appear, and and so it helps to remember that. It also, and you framed that beautifully earlier when you were speaking of life's regenerative process, because a lot of people make the mistake of seeing regenerative just as another adjective that, oh, we've done circular, we've done smart and lean and sustainable, and now we do regenerative for a while, and then the next one will be thrivable or flourishing or whatever.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
and it's not. There's a lovely conversation that I had with Fritjof Capra a couple of weeks ago, or a couple of months ago by now, where we speak about regeneration as the essence of life's self-organization. So it's a core pattern that life uses to create conditions conducive to life, to diversify and then subsequently integrate diversity at higher levels of complexity through predominantly collaborative or integrative synergetic actions. And that's the process we need to reintegrate into. And I think that to help me where we were going with this, it's getting late here.
Well, I mean, it's getting complex, but it's also so beautiful to follow these trains of thoughts because, that might be the purpose of being human, is to understand regeneration is the cycle of life. We're part of it. And so our purpose really is to recognize being a part of life rather than to be an antagonist to life, right? And then therefore having all of these, destructive, maybe even these destructive influences over our soul. You mentioned, Goethe's Faust, or we could mention Rudolf Steiner and his anthroposophy, or Frankenstein. All of these doomsday scenarios, they're influences on our soul to a degree, or on our being, but they're not where we need to go, right? Like, this is just one of the pathways. It is that bifurcation point, and so I think we're talking about this beautiful notion of regeneration beyond just being another label of the mind, but being fundamentally connected to all of life, which is who we are. You went to the Indigenous understanding, and I've spent a fair amount with Indigenous leaders as well. And in North America and in English, it's quite difficult to say I am Indigenous if I'm a white, tall man that was born in Germany, right? But in Brazil, for example, my friends from Indigenous communities in the Amazon, they chuckle and they're like, no, that's the only thing you need to understand, is that you are also indigenous to the earth. If you don't get that, then we can't even really
There's no point to start. But the fascinating thing here is to come back to what you said earlier with regard to AI. We seem to be circling into that subject. Is we forget our own biases. Like, we've mentioned the bias of privilege a number of times, which is important. But we also, as we speak about how AI is being entrained, what is downloaded, like what's the magic? Why is it suddenly going through the roof? Because everything, whether it's pictures or image or video or text or audio, it's all being turned into a language that can be processed by the artificial intelligence. And the fact that what we feed it is predominantly in English, the thinking and the wise insights of the most lost generation in human history, that has completely forgot its roots and doesn't even remember the original instructions that all indigenous people have carried for 290,000 years in order to sustain us and help us evolve, transcend, and meet uncertainty. I think it's a bit dangerous to have the arrogance to think that that intelligence is then going to advise the rest of humanity how to deal with the problems that type of intelligence created in the first place. So,
Yeah, I think you're
I mean,
spot on. I think you're spot on.
I'm completely aware that all of this conversation is going on at a time where this is bursting out of all seams, and it's very difficult to conceive that we could stop it even if we try to. And the argument that there'll be rogue actors not sticking with the agreement of putting a lid on something is always a powerful one in a world that is based on separation and fear. And we've created a world based on separation and fear instead of understanding our interbeing and our interdependence, and the very process of life itself being syntropic, creating conditions conducive for more life to thrive. So we've got, as you said,
That's the
this is an
bifurcation.
exciting, interesting time to be alive. Sometimes
Yeah.
you don't want to get too deeply into the analysis of what is, because it's pretty depressing.
Well, it can be, right, and this is one of the questions I still have left that I want to ask you, Daniel. Is it can be depressing. I said it earlier, like it's hard to be alive in this world without sometimes feeling frustrated or sad. I would even say again, if you never felt frustrated or sad, you might not be alive at all, right? Like it's we're humans, so we have these emotional experiences which actually teach us and tell us and put us in touch with what's really happening deep underneath. And so how do you personally, Daniel, come back to optimism and find this optimism for like, no, wait, but life is syntropic. We as humans in the interbeing of all of us we're able to move into a world of synergy. Like how does that process look for you?
Um, Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes some months it works better than others. Yeah, but you actually mentioned this earlier, and it's a really important insight that we need to actually look into our capacity to sense, feel, and intuit again. The despair that we feel when we look at what we see, what we're doing to each other and to the community of life. And interestingly enough, you said you were born in 87 in Germany. Joanna Macy was in Germany around those times and working for Radio Free Europe before the wall came down and all those things. And she developed what became the work that reconnects in a workshop series that back then was called Despair and Empowerment Workshop. And it was mainly about having, at that time, people face the imminence of a nuclear holocaust, of a third world touch up with nuclear weapons, using Germany as the battleground. And um, out of that grew when for a short time that story got parked and we thought we left it in the last century and now it's coming back. But she then used the same approach to the ecological crisis when she co-developed deep ecology. And it's really the core of the work that reconnects, that you first have to touch into that despair. It's the same as Thich Nhat Hanh said when he asked, what do we most need to do by one of his students? He didn't say we need to sit on our safu and meditate. He said what we most need to do is cultivate our capacity to hear the earth crying within us. Because that crying within us is life itself crying through us. That's the beginning of the capacity to life move through us. And I remember Joanna saying to me that if you ever have to go on a stage and you have the GBs, just breathe deeply and remember that you are speaking as life, for life. You are 3.8 billion years of evolution taking form in the present. And I think that's what we need to remember, that even this concept of time, even her, like Joanna is herself saying that the concept that she developed with David Corton, we're living in the great turning, the move from the industrial growth society to the life-sustaining society. She recently is starting to question whether that actually created or included still the narrative of we're incomplete and we need to go to another future that will be other and better. I think what we need to learn is the immediacy of the specificity of the living present. The people we're in front of, the opportunities we have every day to make decisions, to choose how we think, act, and speak about things. And in doing so, we take back a lot of our agency and our capacity to align with life. And for me, that's where I go when I go into despair. I go into the garden and I would play with my daughter, and I try to more and more. And in many ways, this has been a practice for me for the last couple of years. Is like, what would it be like to do? Yes, we can, but should we, in a personal level? And pay attention to my time online, pay attention to my time engaged in the digital, and favor the analog over the digital. How do we relive our lives as embodied members of living communities of human beings and of modern human beings? And for me, that's a journey worth going on, and it's exciting, and it gives me the hope that if we all come to that moment, which is a moment that even in collapse, you can choose how to respond to it. And if you can align with life as the larger being, then it's a way to face mortality. It's a way to face collapse, that can actually allow us to let go. And I think it's maybe this capacity to actually let go, to take ourselves less serious, to not be scared of death so much, because we understand that when any wisdom tradition ever talked about eternal life, they didn't talk about this dude and this dude living forever, or Ray Kurzweil downloading himself onto a microchip and then putting it into a robot. No, they talked about eternal life, life being eternal. And if
Yeah.
we reconnect to that, then maybe life is actually a gift. This is where we started.
You
Yeah,
definitely
life is
you
a
definitely
gift.
found my way of humor right there. Is like, yeah, none of those cultures, no matter which one it was, no matter which background, talked about, downloading our consciousness on a carbon disk to then clone our body later on and live forever as the physical form of me. No, but they all did talk about eternal life, no matter which religion, no matter which spirituality, no matter which indigenous group. There's this notion of we're already eternal from a spirit-based perspective, right? Which is far out for some people, but I think this is a big part of recognizing is we're spirits on a human experience, right? And in that human experience, it's about understanding that we're a big part of the cycle of life. And again, I said this earlier, we've inherited systems and ways of thinking and talking that are pretty limited to the totality of the eternity of the spirit, and also the power of Mother Earth. I mean, she the planet doesn't need saving. I think that's been said many times, because it's just, are we waking up to who we truly are, or are we going to run an experiment that is more destructive? So yeah,
Mm.
between optimism and all of the feelings, I think feeling those feelings and being in the garden makes us present and aware that this is the journey we're on. And then from
Mm.
there, I love where you went with that, Daniel, because it's really about, and this is how I see it in a picture, and I think it's maybe an easy picture, but we've grown up drinking the Kool-Aid, many of us at least, that this is a world with a certain kind of future shown to us through media and news, and as long as you just consume the right steps, it will be okay for you. But really, it's not the way it is. We're not consuming reality. We're creators of reality with agency. But that agency, even though it is about which future we create, that agency always only happens here right now. And it always only happens here right now with the people that surround us, right? Like, I'm on Galiano Island as we're recording this at my friend's kitchen here. And as I said, they have a few kids and they live on a farm. And oh man, like my personal life slows down when I'm around this kind of way of living,
Mm.
and I'm just so grateful for it to realize, you know what?
Yeah,
It's
it's
noon, but let me close my laptop because it just feels so good to be
yeah.
present with what is going on here.
No, I mean that's it. The slowing down, and then like I mean, with a lot of the kind of resilience folk and people talking about what time is up now. Um, the framing from the Stockholm Resilience Center that we live in the great acceleration. We need the great deceleration in our lives, but also in our industrial throughput, in the things we need to consume, and all of that. And coming home to what is really meaningful when you live your life through the capacities of sensing, feeling, and intuiting, and not just thinking, um, is coming home to a life in the immediacy of community, family, and falling in love with one's bioregion. It's the enjoying that everybody is in this boat together. It's called a watershed, and we're trying to make the best out of it, and we're doing our bit to heal this part of the planet, and we're an open and collaborative attitude towards anybody elsewhere who's doing their bit in their bioregion to heal their part of the planet. And we're not xenophobic and putting up the walls and not letting anybody in. We still have exchange, but we focus on the immediacy of the gift, which is
Yeah.
all around us when we're ready to see it. And yeah, it might be idealistic. Right now, I'm privileged enough to be able to live that reality and find it very enriching, and
Yeah.
I wish we would all come to that insight. But I also know that we need many stepping stones and shifts in conditions for people. But as you said, like there are a lot of people who might not have economic wealth, but they have wealth in social cohesion. They have wealth in being meaningfully embedded in a culture. They have wealth in knowing their place. I mean, I recently,
Or they can step into it no matter where they're from, no matter where they are, right? Like the wealth of social relationships. And, any change in human history ever has only happened through a group of people being more coherent than another group of people and enacting the change that they want to see, right? So it's, I think this is a big missing link in a lot of the conversations, is that change based on people coming together is so much more imminent and close than we think, because it doesn't
exactly.
need 4 billion people to agree. It just needs a group of people to come into coherence and take action, right? And that group of people can even disagree on certain nuances, which is, as you said earlier, is really healthy actually, right? Because it will make the group more resilient. And so,
But this is why it's so important, what we were talking about earlier, that we need to switch out of the solutioneering mindset, because the solutioneering mindset argues between my solution is better than your solution. If your point of departure is solutions are always prototypes, they're always invitations to say, does it still serve? Is it the right one? What was the mistake? What are the hidden side effects that we didn't pay attention to? And if we have that attitude towards whatever our solutions are, we need solutions, then we will be able to listen to each other in a different way. And we like it's the flip that in my book I call it ad nauseum. I refer to it as living the questions together. That regenerative cultures are cultures that focus on the process of discovery, learning, and continuous adaptation to novelty and uncertainty. They don't focus on enshrining things forever. And that's a major shift. So in that sense, much more than we need to all, a small group of people needs to all agree on something. It's actually easier than that. We just need to find other people who care about something and embed what they care about in the narrative of, look, we're a culture of care. You care for badgers, you care for single mums, you care for elderly, you care for redwoods. And we all together care for life and try to make it flourish. And we're all much more in the present, already a regenerative culture than we ever our narrative allowed us to see. So it's to really come home to a place and pick everybody up and begin a process with these people, engaging them through saying, we appreciate what you do for us in this place. And then saying, would you also be interested in joining a journey of learning by which we fall in love with this place and this bioregion again? And to really, because none of us know, like a couple of days ago, I had a stunning realization where I saw a post on LinkedIn. Somebody, it was like on one side, 5 logos of very famous companies that everybody would know, and
and then,
then 5 leaves of trees that everybody should know because they're core trees in almost all temperate bioregions and so on. And I looked at the 5 leaves and I kind of go, if I'm really honest, I know 3 of them and the other 2 I would have to guess. And the logos, there was no doubt I knew all of them. And that's quite instructive, isn't it?
I mean, memology in that sense is also a big mirror to our consciousness, right? And it even, again, it transcends language, because you can read that meme of the logos and the leaves without speaking English or without speaking, French, Spanish, or German. Like, you could be from anywhere in the world, and likely,
Yeah,
unfortunately, no matter where you're from, you'd know those 5 logos of those companies, right?
yeah.
Daniel, this was such an inspiring conversation. I really love what you're saying, like living the questions together, right? And stepping out of that solutioneering mindset. I think those are some really great pointers you've left for everyone who's tuned in, to continue down that path, because it's really also not about um, just one person knowing. It's about all of us together coming in this act of being alive on planet Earth in every moment.
Mm.
Thank you so much for your presence with us today, and thank you so much for this inspired conversation.
Thank you for having me. And just the final gift that I've been given from many Indigenous conversations that I've had over the years, it seems like every Indigenous culture asks those three questions with every, like in the process of living the question is, and it's an invitation for all of you to try it on for a while. If you make decisions that are somewhat impactful in your life, ask yourself, does it serve myself? Does it serve my community? And does it serve life? And really sit with it to find meaningful, at least two or three meaningful answers on all three levels. It is never enough if it only satisfies one of the three. The activist burns out because he doesn't pay attention to, does it serve myself? And at the same time, many people over consuming only look at how it serves themselves and don't pay attention to how their actions affect community and life. And I think if we all created cultures that fall in love with place and ask those three questions regularly, we have a chance to get through the eye of the needle. Thanks for having me, and this was a wonderful conversation.
Thank you.